So when you're producing a documentary, one aspect of that might be to have interviews, engaging with people about your topic. You have a number of obligations as an interviewer to the person that you're interviewing, both morally and legally. So let's go through some of those and think about the way in which you have to find, engage, and also ensure the safety of both you and your interviewee. Let's start with how you engage your interviewee. It's really important that you make sure the interviewee knows exactly what it is that they're getting themselves in for. So in order to do this, you should really prepare something called a participant information sheet. That's sort of a technical term, but essentially what we're trying to do is to create a document that tells your interviewee what it is that your project is all about. You need to tell them what the purpose of your study is, what it aims to achieve, what their participation involves, but also how you're going to use the data and the recordings of those processes. It's really important that your interviewee knows how you're going to store that information and how it's going to be used in its dissemination. Is it going to be just in text? Is it going to be in a documentary? And if so, where might you show it and when and to which audiences? From an interviewee's perspective, it's really, really important that they know exactly how their image, their face, and their data ultimately is going to be used in your work. So the best way to approach this is to sit down with a number of questions, the ones we've just spoken about. What is the aim of the project? What does my participation involve? Will I be anonymous? From a legal perspective, it's really important that you have their legal permission, their legal consent for you to use that information, to use that footage and ultimately their image. So the best way to do this is to have a release form. There are plenty online that you can get, for example on the Oral History Society. This document allows your interviewee to consider the various aspects of their contribution. Whether, for example, they're happy for you to reveal their identity by name, whether they're happy for you to use it in an educational context, a professional context, or a commercial context. But it also makes sure that you're legally covered to use their image. We work in an ethical field. It's really important that the person you're interviewing is happy with the way in which that you've approached them, the way in which the interview is going to be conducted, but also the way in which you as the filmmaker uses that footage and information that you have about them. So there are a number of different ways in which you might interview. There are structured, semi-structured, or unstructured interviews. The structured interview is where you have exactly the same questions for each of the people that you're going to interview. So you might, for example, have 5 different issues that you want to talk about with your interviewees. And you might have 3 questions per section, for example. So for each interview, you'd have 5 sections of 3 questions, so 15 questions. And you'd ask the same 15 questions to each of the people that you go to interview. In essence, this is kind of a questionnaire. You stick to a script and you ask the same question to everyone. That, however, is a little bit inflexible in as much as it doesn't really give you the opportunity to ask follow-up questions. It doesn't give you the opportunity to be more flexible in the way in which you engage with your audience. So most interviewers and most oral historians and those that use video, they tend to be either semi-structured or unstructured interviews. Personally, I prefer semi-structured interviews. You go into each interview with a fairly consistent set of questions, but with the flexibility to ask follow-up questions or to ask slightly more tailored questions depending on your particular audience. If you're interviewing a politician, for example, you could use a similar set of questions that you then would use when you interviewed a journalist about the same issue. But you have that flexibility. Clearly there are going to be differences in the way in which you interview a policy maker to a journalist who reports on those issues. So in that sense, a semi-structured interview is much more flexible and much more malleable to your purposes. But at the same time, it gives you a core to your project that an unstructured interview doesn't. And if nothing else, it makes sure that you appear prepared for when you engage your interviewee. A really important part of being a documentary filmmaker or an interviewer is that the person that you engage knows that you're prepared. You'll always get a much better response if you are knowledgeable about the subject, but also appear to be prepared. You have a set number of questions about very specific things. Start broad and become more specific as you go through your interview. So for example, if you have 5 different topics, the first question might be sort of a broader introduction to the topic. Invite your interviewee to speak more broadly about the topic and then start to zoom in on the exact detail that you want to engage. Remember that the person you're speaking to might not be an expert about your subject. You're the expert. You're investigating this topic. So ensure that the person you're speaking to doesn't feel intimidated. Don't start the interview with a really specific and niche question. It can be a little bit unsettling. So make sure that you start off with a rather broader question that allows your interviewee to feel comfortable and on familiar terrain. And then once you've established that baseline, you can start to be much more specific and much more niche and much more detailed about the line of questioning that you might take. Your job as an interviewer is not to morally judge the person you're interviewing. This is a project where you're exploring the subject. Whilst of course we all have our own politics and some more than others wear our politics on our sleeve, it's really important that you as the interviewer in this process is simply trying to extract a response from your interviewee. Whilst you may differ in opinion, you might find their views problematic. It's not up to you to judge them morally from behind the camera. It's important that you allow them to articulate their responses to your questions. We don't suggest having an argument on film, but you have the right as a scholar, as a filmmaker, and as a person investigating a particular topic to ask important and perhaps sometimes difficult questions of the people that you're speaking to. Ultimately, these people have given you their time. They've given you the opportunity to explore their ideas and their perspectives on your issue. So you should always engage that respectfully. Whilst you might disagree with them, it's not fair of you to shame their opinions if you don't agree with them, or to challenge them in a way that isn't academic or in line with your core values as a humanist. We must retain the capacity and the right to respectfully challenge opinions. That is your ultimate duty as a scholar of the humanities and a digital humanist and documentary maker.